Join the dark side of storytelling with my horror podcast on Patreon. Gain access to my archive of over 50 bonus episodes and experience fear like never before. I want you on your very best behavior when you meet Elaine and Samantha, my father reminded me, just before I met the woman who would change my life forever. She and I have become close in the past few months, and I'd like it a lot if the two of you could get along. Close? Gross. I made a face. 12-year-old me had zero intention of getting along with this stranger who was supposed to replace Mom or her dumb kid. With a grimace, my father pushed open the glass double doors leading to the garden cafe. It was the fanciest place I'd ever seen. A woman with luscious dark hair and a blue dress and white sun hat stood to wave us over, and I was suddenly aware of the dirt on my shoes, how greasy my skin was, and the way my supermarket t-shirt didn't fit quite right. I'd like to introduce you to Elaine Laurent and her daughter, Samantha, my father was saying somewhere in the background, but I wasn't listening. Elaine was beautiful. Elaine was gracious. Elaine could light up a room with her smile. But her daughter wasn't human. Samantha was a preteen-sized mannequin in a wheelchair, with a brown wig on its head and a crude face painted over its anonymous plastic features. Please tell me this is a joke, I whispered to my father. He shook his head angrily. What was that, dear? Elaine leaned toward me. My son was saying just how incredible this place is. My father nudged me in the ribs, and I nodded along. Inside, I cringed. If anybody from school saw me with this crazy lady and her freaky doll, my life was officially over. During the hour or so that I spent with my future stepmother, my eyes kept drifting to the mannequin in the wheelchair beside me. Elaine was a regular, and the waitstaff seemed to take it in stride, even putting a napkin in the mannequin's lap and a glass of ice water beside its ivory white hand. I didn't see how they could be so casual about it. Samantha had a presence that was more than just unsettling. It was downright creepy. The way that Elaine spoke to it like it could hear her and talked about it like it was a real person only deepened the weirdness of it all. It wasn't until the drive home that my father explained the story behind his new girlfriend's plastic daughter. The real Samantha Laurent had hung herself when she was just 13 years old. It was a tragedy that no one saw coming. By all accounts, Elaine's only daughter had been a happy child with many friends and a good home life. She hadn't left any note, and a search through her possessions revealed nothing about what might have motivated her to take her own life. According to my father, that was what had affected Elaine so much, the sheer cruel unexpectedness of it. Elaine had told my father that she felt like a part of her was missing, that without Samantha by her side, she was no longer whole. Elaine claimed that it got so bad that she couldn't leave her own house. That was when her psychiatrist suggested the support doll, a mannequin representing Samantha that would accompany Elaine throughout her daily life. The hope was that by doing so, Elaine could make peace with the past and ease herself out of her depression. So far, it seemed to be working. By the time Elaine met my father, she no longer needed Samantha's mannequin to accompany her everywhere, only when she would be out of the house for long periods of time. My father told me that we should be understanding. The mannequin was a tool to help Elaine get better, no different from a seeing eye dog or a set of crutches. That was easy for him to say. He didn't go to middle school. He didn't have to worry about being seen in public with it. At first, when Elaine would take me to the zoo or out for ice cream, I was mortified by Samantha's presence beside me. But like the waiters in the garden cafe where I'd first met Elaine, I slowly became accustomed to its presence. Soon enough, I barely even noticed that the mannequin was there, at least during the day. At night was a different story. As my father and Elaine grew even closer, she began inviting us to movie nights at her house. If it hadn't been obvious that my father's new girlfriend was wealthy before, her home theater setup made it obvious. Even so, it was hard to pay attention to a movie with Samantha beside me. I kept expecting its plastic head to snap angrily in my direction, or her ball-jointed fingers to suddenly grab my arm. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the mannequin seemed to follow me through the house. When I'd go to the restroom or refill my water in the kitchen, I'd turn around to find it there, its wheelchair squeaking, even though I couldn't see who had moved it. The artistic lighting in Elaine's home made its face seem angry, even hostile. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wanted me out of its house. I didn't want to jeopardize my father's relationship with Elaine, so I kept my fears to myself. The truth was, I was excited about welcoming her into our family. Elaine was beautiful, worldly, and kind. In the months that I'd known her, she'd taken me shopping to replace my hideous wardrobe, helped me with my Spanish homework, and taught me how to cook. Following a short engagement, Elaine and my father married. A few weeks later, we moved into her 3-story timber frame home overlooking the river. I'd grown up in a rundown 70s-era ranch in the middle of nowhere, and to me, Elaine's house felt like heaven. Except at night. Every night at 9 o'clock, Elaine lifted her mannequin daughter from its wheelchair and carried it to the bedroom at the end of the hallway. The room used to be Samantha's, and I'd only been inside it once. With its perfectly ordered bookshelves and clothes hanging neatly in the closet, it was like a shrine to Elaine's dead daughter, and it gave me the creeps. After the mannequin was put to bed and Elaine went back downstairs, I always turned up the volume of whatever video game I was playing, but it didn't help. I could still hear the floor creaking in the room at the end of the hallway. The noise sounded horribly like footsteps, and the more time I spent in Elaine's house, the closer they seemed to come to my bedroom door. One night, I sat up in a cold sweat to see the doorknob turning slowly. Something was trying to come into my room. I tried to get out of bed quietly, but whatever was outside the door heard me and scurried away before I could catch a glimpse of it. I gulped. The house was dead quiet. I held my breath as I tiptoed down the hallway and opened the door to Samantha's old room. It wasn't what I saw that made my blood run cold. It was what I didn't see. Samantha the mannequin was gone. Elaine normally tucked it in beneath the blankets, but now the blankets were disturbed and Samantha was missing. Impossible, I told myself. Mannequins don't move by themselves. It has to be around here somewhere. I crept across the deathly silent bedroom, checking beneath the bed and under the study table. I was just about to look in the closet when a jangly, writhing mass of plastic limbs fell from the ceiling on top of me. I screamed. My father had been on his way back from the toilet when he heard my preteen shriek.
"What are you doing?"
he demanded when he saw me lying on the floor of Samantha's bedroom with the tangled up mannequin on top of me.
"I heard noises. Put Samantha back in her bed right now,"
my father hissed.
"This isn't a game. Can you imagine how your stepmother would feel if she could see this?"
With gritted teeth, I tucked my plastic stepsister back into bed. Her blank face almost seemed to be laughing at me as I left the room beneath my father's angry gaze. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. A few weeks after I was caught in Samantha's room, I heard my father shouting downstairs.
"Get down here!"
He roared again, and I rubbed my eyes groggily. What was he yelling about at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning? As I plodded out of my bedroom in my pajamas, I couldn't imagine what I'd done to upset him so much. My spirits sank when I saw the hallway. "Get out," was written in paint across Elaine's beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows. Where the words ended, Samantha, the mannequin, lay. Paint dripped from its fingers and a spilled bucket lay beside it, red paint pooling around it like blood.
"Look, son,"
my father put a heavy hand on my shoulder.
"if you aren't happy here, you can tell me. We can talk about it. But don't hurt Elaine like this. She's been nothing but kind to us. And these cruel pranks of yours? I didn't do this,"
I stammered.
"Oh, really? Then who did? Me? Elaine? The mannequin?"
My father pinched his brow, trying to control his temper.
"Just clean this up, will you?"
Scraping paint off of expensive windows wasn't exactly how I'd imagined myself spending my Saturday, but it paled in comparison to the second part of my chore, cleaning the paint off of Samantha herself. I didn't want to be alone with the mannequin, but I didn't dare to complain about my punishment. My father was furious, and I could feel Elaine's silent disappointment from across the house. They both blamed me, but I knew better. Samantha was sending my father and I a message. We weren't welcome here.
What are you, really?
I whispered to the mannequin as I lowered it into the bathtub.
What do you want?
Its unblinking eyes stared straight up at the ceiling. I sighed and went back to scrubbing the paint off of its fingers. Suddenly, its hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. It brought a finger to its plastic lips. With a moan, I pried its cold grip off of my arm and flung the mannequin backwards into the bathtub where it lay, a lifeless figurine once again. I would have been convinced that I was going crazy if it weren't for the crimson fingerprints on my wrist.
Please!
I whispered to the mannequin as I carried it back to its room and dressed it.
Please, just leave me alone.
I had hoped to reason with it, but after that night, the mannequin made my life a living hell. I still remember how the hair on the back of my neck would stand up while I walked down a supposedly empty hallway. When I turned around, I'd catch a glimpse of a plastic face spying on me from around the corner. In my most vulnerable moments, like going down a dark staircase, showering with my eyes closed, or even while I slept, I'd feel the mannequin's hand grab me out of nowhere. It would twist its head and jab its finger angrily toward the door of the house before collapsing into a lifeless heap of plastic. Each time, I had to carry it back to its room or its wheelchair, hoping I wouldn't get caught. Was Samantha possessing it? Did she want us out of her family? It was the only explanation I could think of, but who would believe me? Whenever my father or Elaine were around, the mannequin never did anything strange. It was maddening. I started to wonder if maybe my father was right. What if all this really was just a cry for help? What if it was all only happening in my head? In spite of my doubts, I still locked my bedroom door at night. Unfortunately, it didn't occur to me to lock my bedroom window as well. Half asleep, I remember thinking that the scratching sounds outside were branches scraping against the glass. It didn't occur to me that small plastic fingers crawling along the wall would make a similar noise. When I opened my eyes and saw the dark shape pushing open the window, I was sure that I was dreaming. Until the mannequin leapt on top of me and began squeezing my throat. It should have been light and hollow. It should have been impossible for it to be so strong. But its grip was too tight for me to scream. I squirmed, kicking over a lamp, knocking books from my bedside table, beating my head against the wall in a panic as tiny black dots appeared before my eyes. As my vision began to fade, I heard running footsteps and lights clicking on throughout the house. As my father forced open the door, Samantha the mannequin went limp in my arms. The next morning, I was in the back of my father's truck, on the way to an appointment at a psychiatrist's office. Even at 12 years old, I had a feeling I knew what would happen if I told the psychiatrist what I'd experienced. I opted for the version of events that my father already believed. I told her that I made it all up and that I was acting out. I could see in her clever brown eyes that she knew there must be more to the story, but she didn't push me any further that day. Over a tense lunch back at home, my father explained that he was leaving on a business trip the very next morning. My blood ran cold. This would be the first time I was left alone with Elaine and her daughter.
All I ask,
my father said the next morning, standing in front of his idling truck,
is that you try to make things right with Elaine while I'm gone. She's done so much for us. She doesn't deserve this.
He sighed, his breath white in the morning chill. He ruffled my hair.
I love you.
My father slung his duffel bag into the back seat and backed down the driveway with a wave. I turned back to the doorway, where Elaine was waiting with a smile. My father had reacted to the disturbing incidents around the house with outbursts, punishments, and finally a mental health evaluation. But Elaine's response had always been different. She had completely ignored my supposed pranks and continued to smother me with kindness, buying me gifts, cooking my favorite meals, and doubling down on her attempts to make me feel welcome. Compared to my father's anger, her patience had been a relief at first. Only now, when I was about to be alone with her for the first time, did her generosity seem uncanny. Elaine was hiding something beneath her soothing words and soft touch, and I was determined to find out what it was. I began to wonder if maybe she was just as afraid of the mannequin as I was, if it had some kind of control over her. In the months that we lived in the house, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd been upstairs to the bedroom that my father shared with Elaine. Not even her beloved mannequin ever went up there. The next time Elaine went shopping, I faked a cold, and after I heard the garage door close, I made my way up to the third floor to snoop. Like the rest of the house, it was all white walls and timber beams, as clean and neat as an IKEA catalog. Although I did notice something odd. There were tiny symbols carved into the door frames up here, so small that I never would have noticed them if I hadn't happened to pass my finger over the wood. I was looking for a way to open the locked drawers of Elaine's desk when I found more of the strange symbols along the wall behind it. An uneasy feeling crept into my gut as I noticed that the wall under the desk felt hollow, and when I pressed it, a half-sized door creaked open. I looked over my shoulder, suddenly afraid I'd find Elaine, or the mannequin, standing just inches behind me. But the room was deserted. I realized that I was about to break the boundaries of mere snooping and go into a different territory altogether. If I got caught on my way out, I'd have no excuse, but I had to know. Something told me that this was where all the secrets led, the key that would explain the unsettling events that had haunted me ever since we moved in with Elaine. I went down to the garage, shook a cobwebby flashlight to life, and then crawled into the dark passage on the third floor. It led to a small room whose existence I never would have guessed from the outside of the house. It was a kind of workshop. 3 generations of mannequins stared down at me from a workbench, a wooden one that must have been at least 100 years old, a faceless frame and cloth one from the 1960s, and another modern plastic one. Photos, paintings, and heirlooms lined the walls. They went back centuries, but the woman at the center of each was always eerily recognizable. It was Elaine. What the hell was going on? More of those funny letters were carved into the floor in a circle. It was ringed with half-burnt candles, a bronze plate, and other ritualistic stuff I didn't recognize. In the center of it all was a 4th mannequin, one that was painted and dressed to look like me. I froze, heart pounding, waiting for it to sit up and wrap its lifeless hands around my throat. But nothing happened. I gulped, my throat dry in the dusty air. An ancient book lay open in front of the circle. It was written with the same symbols that were carved into the floor, and while I couldn't read it, I got some idea of what it was about from the hideous illustrations that filled every other page. It was a guide to killing a younger person and trapping their soul in a life-size doll, then draining that soul's energy to stay young, forever. Samantha the mannequin hadn't been trying to frighten me away because of malevolence or jealousy. She'd been trying to save my life. With a chill, I understood that when the mannequin had wrapped its hands around my neck, it wasn't to hurt me. Samantha had been trying to show me, wordlessly, how she died. Samantha's life had ended with a rope around her neck, but not because of suicide. A door opened downstairs. I panicked, scrambling desperately out through the dusty passage and banging my head in the process. I remembered to put everything back where I'd found it, hadn't I? What would I tell Elaine if she saw me before I made it back to my room? I was so busy making up excuses that I almost ran headfirst into Elaine as she came up the stairs.
Careful,
Elaine warned, steadying me with her perfect hands. I recoiled at their touch. How many had she killed with those hands, imprisoning their spirits and making up lies about what happened? Elaine bit her lip. There was a sympathetic expression on her face that somehow seemed rehearsed. When she spoke again, I understood everything.
I'm afraid I have some bad news. There's been an accident. The brakes went out on your father's truck, and...
I felt dizzy. The stairs beneath my feet seemed far away. I ran to my bedroom.
Wait, where are you going?
Elaine called after me. I ignored her. There had been no accident, I was sure of it. Elaine had tampered with my father's truck. She wanted to get me alone, to transfer my spirit into that horrible doll upstairs. I looked out my bedroom window and shivered. The rainy sky, the river below, the forested estate surrounding Elaine's house. There was nobody around for miles. Nobody to hear me scream. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window and gasped. My forehead was bleeding. My shirt and pants were gray with dust. It would have been obvious to Elaine where I'd been, and if she knew what I knew. Suddenly, a silk cord slipped around my neck, cutting off my air supply. My lungs burned. I never lost the ability to breathe so quickly and completely. Black spots appeared in front of my eyes as I struggled feebly against the merciless cord around my neck. My attempts to fight back grew weaker and weaker as I ran out of oxygen. Elaine was just too strong. Of course, I thought dizzily. She's a professional. She's done this to Samantha, those 3 strangers whose mannequins she's hidden upstairs, and who knows how many others. There was never going to be any escape. It was like slipping into a warm, black, endless nothing. I'm 12 years old, I thought, as my body went limp and my lungs gave up. I'm 12 years old, and I'm about to die. The cord loosened. Elaine shrieked. As I fell to the floor, gasping for air, I saw immediately what had happened. The mannequin had crept up behind her while she was distracted and plunged a knife into her rib cage. Elaine had been draining energy from Samantha's spirit for years, but it must have had just enough strength for this one final act. The mannequin was truly lifeless now, and so was Elaine. Her skin shriveled sickeningly as she aged centuries in mere seconds. I did my best not to touch the hideous corpse while I crawled to the nearest phone and called for help. When the first responders arrived, they attributed my garbled, incoherent story to shock. Without any other rational explanation for Elaine's death, it was ultimately ruled a bizarre accident. Next, however, came the moment I'd been dreading, visiting my father in the hospital. The EMTs who picked me up stayed with me through the whole process, and although I'm sure it wasn't a regular part of their duties, I was relieved to feel their strong hands on my shoulders when I was led into my father's bedside. The big man looked gaunt and pale, hooked up to a room full of beeping hospital machines, a tube in his mouth, plaster casts covering injuries that I felt sick just imagining. But he was alive. Elaine's plan had failed, and he ultimately made a full recovery. As Elaine's spouse, he also inherited her house. He intended to sell the place, as it was haunted by too many ghosts, both real and imagined. Before he could, however, Elaine's home burnt to the ground. The police attributed the fire to arson, although the perpetrator was never caught. And I can't help but wonder, are there others out there like Elaine? Did they start the blaze to keep their awful secrets safe? I'm honestly not sure, but even today, every time I see a mannequin, I start to wonder. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.